Muggsy and their damn good-looking and insanely comfortable menswear are visiting from Chicago with a limited-time pop-up right here in Georgetown at 3112 M Street Northwest. All of their jeans, pants, tops, and jackets are what they call straunchy. That means they're soft, stretchy, and strong, and they look damn good too. Plus, when you stop by, you'll get a free styling, and there's going to be free drinks and games. It's going to be a vibe. Check out the pop-up at 3112 M Street Northwest. It's open now 11 through 7 Mondays through Saturdays and 11 through 6 on Sundays. See you there.
Today on CityCast DC, we're talking about St. Elizabeth's. As a lot of folks know, the campus of DC's psychiatric hospital has transformed over the past 15 years. Yeah, there's still a hospital, but a huge part of the former campus now houses a federal cabinet agency, and another part is being redeveloped as stores and houses. NBC4's Mark Segraves recently gained access to a part that the new management really doesn't want to talk about. The site of some pretty ghastly surgeries and experiments from the time when St. Elizabeth's was known as an insane asylum. Mark's here to tell us about it. Today is Thursday, June 11th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Mark, good to see you.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me back. It's always good to be here.
So you did this story this week that was like a thing you said you'd been trying to get for a year, and it's about St. Elizabeth's. Now, just so for people who don't know, St. Elizabeth's, the big mental hospital in D.C., for years occupied a huge swath of territory on the east side of the Anacostia, and it has changed a lot. There's still a hospital there, but there's a lot of other things, some developments and stuff. Will you just give people the lay of the land before we get into the part of the land you looked at, which is nuts?
Yeah, look, this campus is the same size as the RFK campus, right? And prime for development, actually much further ahead development-wise on the DC side of the road, and not getting nearly the attention. It's about 175 acres of land that the district government controls on the local side of the St. Elizabeth's campus. The feds, where they have their Homeland Security headquarters, is on the other side of the campus. And this, as you said, a pre-Civil War hospital. The Hospital for the Insane was what it was originally called. And this is where Care First Arena now. Yeah. Care First Arena is located on this campus where the Mystics play. There's been a lot of development with medical facilities and housing already going up, and they're about halfway through the development on the DC side. And it has all these beautiful red brick historic buildings that are sitting there that on the federal side, many of them are being torn down. But on the DC side, there's been a very good effort to not just preserve these buildings, but to repurpose them for community use.
All right. So in your story, you were not looking at the cool things, though. You were looking at old stuff. And it felt a little bit like a setup for a horror movie, right? Like an innocent reporter goes into a space where they used to do lobotomies and stuff. And what happens? But just walk us through what you saw.
Right. So as you said, I've been trying to get in for more than a year into any of these buildings. I didn't care. I knew it had to be cool to be inside. And, I love going inside cool places and being able to show my audience that as well and share that with my audience. And it's one of the greatest things about TV, right, that we're able to do that. And so it did take a year, really, just because of timing and construction. And then I got distracted. They got distracted. But yeah, when they finally gave me the green light to go in, I didn't specify any building, and I really hit the jackpot because one of the buildings they let me go into was the Blackburn building. And this is the building where Dr. Walter Friedman, who really perfected and promoted and proliferated lobotomies here in the United States. He, in fact, performed the very first lobotomy in the United States here at GW University, and most famously performed the lobotomy on Rose Kennedy, the sister of President John F. Kennedy, that we know left her basically incapacitated for the remainder of her life. And so he was a doctor at St. Elizabeth's in the Blackburn building, and he had his morgue and his laboratory in the basement there, where he performed thousands of autopsies over his 11 years there on patients who had died. In fact, one historian told me most of the patients at St. Elizabeth's left through that morgue. Most of the people who were housed there died there. And he performed all of these tests and brain scans and experiments in this laboratory. And to my great displeasure and also kind of creepiness, that laboratory is still, all these years later, very much intact.
So what is it like in there? I mean, just to be clear, these techniques that he innovated are now held in some disrepute. And the techniques of like the psychiatry profession of that era.
I will say St. Elizabeth's was actually a very bright and airy place. They believed that fresh air could cure mental illness back then. And so there are a lot of big windows and there was a lot of big atriums, and the grand architecture really shows that at that time, the federal government was taking this project seriously. They wanted a real substantial place, but they did use it as housing for the mentally ill.
So what was it like in the spaces that you saw?
It was absolutely creepy, and as if time just stopped the day that they locked up the doors. And the only thing that had gone on in there was either time decay or vandals who had gotten in and done a lot of spray painting and graffiti and whatnot. But we went into several labs, several lecture rooms. You know, they had these big wooden doors, right, that they built back then. They were just, with glass in them, and but they would just creak. You see this in my piece, the door that you see creaking open and shut.
Mm-hmm.
In my piece, that was happening. We didn't make that happen for TV. I mean, that is what we walked into. You walk through and you can still see the pastel colors, of course, that they had it painted to give everybody kind of a bright and shiny feeling in there. The cages on some of the doors are still there. You're walking on, years of debris on the floors and the stairs. And then there are some places, and it's completely dark, and, there's no electricity in there. We had to use flashlights to get around. But then you'll get to a hallway where the roof has broken through and caved in. And so there's light pouring through the ceiling in some places. And, it's a photographer's dream subject, right? There's so much to see and do in there. And you really just had this feeling like you could experience what these thousands of patients and doctors and nurses all experience as they walk through these hallways over the many generations that St. Elizabeth's was operating.
What kind of debris was on the floor?
A lot of it was, the ceilings had fallen in. And so stuff falling off of the walls and plaster and broken glass. But when we got into Dr. Freeman's laboratory, some of his brain slides are still in use today. The lobotomy is how he is labeled, and that will forever stain his reputation. But he did do a lot of scientific research on the brains of these patients who had died there that is still used today for neurosurgery. And so, but there is a file cabinet that you'll see in my piece in the corner of his laboratory that had thousands of slides in it. And now thousands of them lay broken and just strewn across the floor of the lab, presumably from vandals who have gone in there and done, there's a lot of graffiti in there now. So before this was, now being rebuilt and refurbished, it just was an empty boarded up building, and clearly people were able to get in.
On these slides, were there pieces of brain?
They were so dirty and so coated that you really couldn't make any of that out. But he is noted for the slides and the brain samples that he used. And again, as I said, some of them are still preserved and still in use and still being used for research. And so it was very important work that he did. He obviously went, in a direction that a lot of people think was a very dark direction. He would travel around the country doing dozens of, like a traveling roadshow, performing lobotomy. He'd come to your neighborhood, do lobotomies with an audience, with the press. There's a story of him doing one with the press. And, his method was called the ice pick method. They literally drilled a hole through your eye to get into your brain. And in one instance, it's reported that he was doing this for an audience, and the press asked him to pose for a picture. And while he did, the ice pick slipped and killed the patient right there in front of the audience. And so he really proliferated the idea that lobotomies could cure mental illness, when we know now they really are not successful in doing that.
Don't miss Folger Theater's How Shakespeare Saved My Life, playing June 9th through July 5th at the Folger Shakespeare Library. In this rolling world premiere, Broadway star Jacob Ming Trent creates a one-man comedy that one critic proclaims Shakespeare would have loved. Born with a gift for poetry but rejected as unfit to play the part of the poet, Ming Trent invites us to take a deep dive into the crevices of his youth. Calling on the bard and a host of genius rappers, half-crazed preachers, and soulful poets, he takes us on a propulsive ride that reaffirms the power of language and music. It's in DC for a limited time only. Tickets start at $20 and can be purchased online at folger.edu or by phone at 202-544-7077. Get yours today. So the idea of there being some like brain slides just hanging around, that's not gonna hurt your pitch when you try to sell this as a zombie movie.
Yeah, I asked the foreman of the job, the developers, I said, what's it like in here day after day after day? And he says, look, I don't believe in ghosts, but you'll walk through this building and for no reason whatsoever, the temperature will change by like 20 degrees. You'll just get to cold spots, hot spots. Doors will, there's no wind coming through here, but doors will swing open and close. And he said, it can get very spooky working in there day after day. And of course, in that building, you have to wear a hazmat suit. So everybody's suited up in there.
What is the hazard?
There's just a lot of dust and debris, and I'm not sure whether they've done asbestos remediation and or tested for that. And so they are very cautious in going in that building. Building P, which we went into, we did not have to wear any PPE. And that building is being redeveloped by a different developer and is going to be a community center for nonprofits and dance groups and things of that nature. When this whole project is done, that whole campus is going to be a brand new neighborhood. And it's one of the most popular new zip codes in DC as far as people moving there. So, comparing it to RFK that gets all of the attention, this is just as big and just as important a development for Washington, DC.
So there is still a psychiatric hospital there. Where is it? Has it just been sort of reduced to like a much smaller chunk of its former self?
Yes, and I got a lot of comments from people talking about that they wish that they would put more resources into that, but that is not part of the plan for the DC side. They are, focusing on, all this different uses for the buildings and for the entire campus, everywhere from housing to sports to even a museum. The Blackburn Laboratory will likely become a museum. And the cool thing about Blackburn is they're actually going to move that building closer to the road to make room for another road that will bisect the campus. And it will be the largest historic building ever moved in the United States when that happens.
Wait, so did you visit the psychiatric hospital? What is that like? Is it still in historic buildings?
We didn't do, we just stuck with the two. Building P and Blackburn were the only buildings we were allowed in, the only place we focused on for this report.
And for regular people, can people get a tour of the old St. E's or visit these?
No, but you can certainly drive the campus and you can drive right up to Building P. You can drive right up to the Blackburn building and you'll see some of the exteriors in my piece. And again, the architecture is just beautiful. I mean, if you're on that side of town and just, it's a great place to take a walk and just admire not just the architecture, but also bear witness to the deterioration and how it's, crumbling apart.
And there's some amazing views of DC too, of the skyline.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would recommend anybody just going. And the great thing is, if you drive through, you will drive through, depending on which way you enter, you can drive through the old part. And as you're driving through, it transitions before your eyes into the redeveloped part. Like you go from these historic, still boarded up, fenced off, grand red brick buildings to those same buildings that have already been refurbished for housing. And then you get to the Care First Arena and some of the medical buildings there. So it's really very cool to go through that campus.
You mentioned, you're interacting with these guys in hard hats and who are on the job and different developers and different buildings. These two spaces that you visited, what are they going to be turned into? Because we know that there's housing built there, there's some community stuff built there. What else is coming?
So we're still a decade away from the completion of everything on that campus. But again, Building P is dedicated to all nonprofit organizations, dance groups, music groups, arts groups, meeting for community events. And that will be most likely open in the next few years. And again, just a beautiful building. The Blackburn building, again, is being moved. And preliminarily, they believe it is going to be at least part of the building will be used as a museum, but they really don't know.
So you mentioned like you're seeing people with hard hats and talking to job coordinators from different developers. So these buildings are being repurposed. Specifically, what's going to go into them? And
Yeah.
I know there's a whole lot of stuff going over there.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things the developer said about this project that the district is taking the time to not tear down like the federal government is, but preserve these buildings is it would just be too expensive to build this type of architecture today, you know, this brick and just all this very intricate design work and everything. So the buildings are all beautiful. The building P that I went into, that's all going to be nonprofit, community-based organizations, dance groups, arts groups, music groups, places for the community to hold meetings and gatherings. And that has been decided. And in fact, I think some of the space, some groups may have already signed up for that space. So they may actually have actual tenants waiting to get in. As far as Blackburn, again, they're going to move that building to make room for a road that will go through the campus. And then tentatively right now in pencil, it's scheduled to be a museum. They don't know, you know, who's going to run it, what museum it would be, or if the entire building would be a museum. But that's what they tentatively have planned for that. Of course, you know, in my personal belief, DC desperately needs its own museum. Every agency, the district government has so many artifacts. The history of DC is really America's history. It would be great to have just a go-to place for DC. The one thing that they are unclear on and could not answer for me is what will happen to Dr. Freeman's operating room, whether that would be preserved or whether, you know, it's in the basement. So it's hard to imagine. I mean, I don't know how engineers work. I don't know if they're going to take the basement over or just the above ground portion, but his laboratory was in the basement. So they did not know whether even the equipment in there was going to be preserved, much less the room intact. They did say they are following all of the protocols and regulations that DC has for these types of historic artifacts. But I would hearken back to RFK being taken down. And I'll shamelessly pat myself on the back. If it had not been for my reporting and my intervention, much of the historic artifacts of RFK would have been thrown in a trash heap, including the Ring of Fame that went around the inside of the stadium that I found literally in a pile of trash in the basement of RFK waiting to be hauled away, as well as the white bleachers that designated all of Frank Howard's home runs. So city doesn't have a great track record in that respect. Again, I think an important reason to go in and document this stuff because it puts pressure on them to, in fact, preserve this.
You know, Mark, for like, I don't know, the last 15, 20 years, the soaring cost of living, particularly for kind of places that like middle-class people can live in, has been a big piece of the story in DC. And yet you're describing this enormous space where, you know, very little's happened during that time. Why has it taken so long?
You know, that I will say, I think the Bowser administration would disagree that it's taken so long.
I mean, in China, they could have built a high-speed train across the country in this time.
Right. And a lot of it has to do with jurisdiction and transfer and the federal government and whatnot. And then just, you know, the economy. If you go back more than 10, 15 years, you know, the economy not necessarily in a place to do this. But I will say over the past 10 years, it has really been jump-started. And I will give credit where credit is due. The Bowser administration really jump-started this project, you know, and found the funding and got a lot of positive stuff going on over there. It's a shame that it took this long, but look, we saw the same thing at RFK and Reservation 13, and there are similar buildings over there on the RFK campus next to the old St. Elizabeth Hospital, not St. Elizabeth, DC General Hospital that was on that site, and the buildings that still stand in that footprint. So, and then, you know, look at the Southwest waterfront. Again, all these big old federal buildings on these federal swaths of land that took, you know, years and years and years to get freed up for anything positive for, you know, the local DC to get there.
Mark, thank you so much for being here. Come back and tell us if the zombies attack.
I will.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.